Hello and welcome to Effortless Mastery. Today we'll be learning the menstrual cycle. Really an exciting topic because females tend to now have these changes that happen in their body marked what they see as a menstrual blood flow, where blood is flowing out of their vagina every single month. It's important we know how does this happen. As a student, you need to know. So today we'll be running on this topic. Please, also, if you are yet to watch our videos, if you are new to this channel, you've not seen our video on oogenesis, please do well to check it out. It will be, I'll add it to the description of this video, and I would like to have you check it out. So for today, let's focus on menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle is a cyclical event, a natural occurring cyclical event. A natural occurrence, so it happens. It's something that happens naturally. Cyclical events that happens in females during their reproductive ages. So when a female is in her reproductive ages she can actually put to bed. She keeps have this thing happening every single month. So this cyclical events that happens every single month is called the menstrual cycle. Now, this event is due to changes in the level of some key hormones in the female reproductive system. And these key hormones include follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone called LH, estrogen, and then progesterone. So these are the key hormones that are involved in these changes called the menstrual cycle. So when the levels of follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, estrogen, and progesterone change, of course it is patterned. As it keeps changing, changes also happen in the female reproductive system, which will now result in something we call the menstrual cycle. Now, the first day of the menstrual cycle is signified with the first day of the blood flow. So I know day one of menstrual cycle by knowing the day. I'd say the day one of menstrual cycle is the day you see your blood flow for the first time. All right. Now, the duration of menstrual cycle is the length, usually around 21 to 35 days. So it's a range. A normal female should have between 21. As low as 21 is still okay. As high as 35 is still okay. But the average we see in most females, usually a value 28 days. So most females tend to have 28, 27, 29, though there are some extremes, 35, 21. But if it goes beyond 35, that's no more normal. Below 21, that's no more normal. Now, these changes that occur in the female reproductive system happen majorly in two organs. And those two organs are the ovary and the uterus. The changes in the ovary is termed ovarian cycle. Changes in uterus is termed endometrial cycle. A lot of people have confusions about, people mix up the words endometrial, uterine. Some people think they are all the same thing. Menstrual, no. Menstrual is the umbrella term of the cyclical events that happens in the female reproductive system. It's now divided into two. What is happening in the ovary called ovarian cycle. What is happening in the uterus called uterine cycle or endometrial. The word endometrial is used because the particular layer of the uterus that's affected is the endometrium. So I can call it endometrial or uterine cycle for what is happening in the uterus. I call it ovarian for what is happening in the ovary. Together, they are called the menstrual cycle. I believe you understand. So now we go on. So we'll just take a quick look at what happens in the ovary and what happens in the uterus. Now, ideally, at puberty, a female has about 400 primordial follicles. What are primordial follicles? These are just primary oocytes surrounded by follicular cells. Now, so after puberty, every single month, 15 to 20 of these follicles are just stimulated to grow under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone. So follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are both secreted by the anterior pituitary gland, whereas these other two are stimulated by the ovary, are released by the ovary. So these two are released by anterior pituitary, these two are released by the ovary. I will explain that as we go on in this video. So every single month, 15 to 20 of these guys are caused to begin to multiply. I know my diagram just shows one, but there are a lot of them. So 15 to 20 from both ovaries. So they begin to develop through some stages. We have pre-antral, antral, and pre-ovulatory, all explained in our oogenesis video. You can just go back and look at it, but it's not necessary for what I'm teaching you today too much. So during this development, we start with 15 or 20 persons. They begin to develop. So what's development here? Follicular cells become granulosa, so they keep growing in size and they change from the primordial to a primary follicle. They now move to antral follicle. So they just keep developing. And as they develop, what happens is that we are told around day 7 or day 8 of the cycle, one person becomes dominant. So I have about 15 to 20 coming out, but only one dominant follicle exists at the time of ovulation. So that dominant follicle will be producing, and then follicles should produce estrogen. So the dominant follicle, as time goes on, estrogen is produced by who? Please, there are two cells, granulosa cells and thicker internal cells. So these cells together join together to form estrogen. So as estrogen is produced, it feeds back on the anterior pituitary and reduces the level of follicle stimulating hormone. So these low levels of estrogen will just cause this guy to be reduced. And once it's reduced, other people are limited. So just one person continues development. And that one person is called what? Yeah, dominant follicle. So now we go on. So you keep developing and developing and developing. The day from day 1 up until the let's say around day 13 is called follicular phase, which involves just development of follicles. By the time we get to around day 13, the follicles have reached a peak of growth. The level of estrogen has so risen. And when it gets to a particular peak, that high level of estrogen will come back and stimulate anterior pituitary to produce an hormone called luteinizing hormone. Forgive my abbreviation, luteinizing hormone. What's the function of this hormone? The hormone will cause the primary oocytes to complete meiosis 1 and become secondary oocytes, and even start meiosis 2 to be arrested at the metaphase. All of this was explained in our oogenesis video. And then beyond that, this same guy, luteinizing hormone, will cause a process which is very important in ovary. In fact, I think one of the most important processes, in fact, that's the essence why we are doing all of these things, which is ovulation. The release of the secondary oocytes, the expulsion of the secondary oocytes from the follicle. And then once this has happened, so we have follicular phase day 1 to day 13. It's believed that for a woman that has a 28-day cycle length, like on the day 14, she ovulates. And after the ovulation, what is left, still under the influence of luteinizing hormone, the remaining thicker cells and granulosa cells that were left here will now be acted upon by luteinizing hormone. The action is simple. They just store lipids, they make them move vascularized, and they become a particular structure we call the corpus luteum. And this structure produces two key hormones, majorly progesterone, but also to a lower level, estrogen. So after this has been done, the essence of the estrogen, we'll mention them later, is all of these things produce both estrogen and progesterone, is to go back and act on the endometrium, which we'll talk about. So which should be to maintain pregnancy. And by the time we are done with this, so that is all that happens in the ovary. I'll repeat myself. So in the ovary, we have two phases bridged by ovulation. Follicular phase, where the follicles are developing. Ovulation on day 14. After ovulation, we now have luteal phase. Please, it is important that we know that the phase, which is the luteal phase, is constant and the duration is always 14 days in every single female. So that means a female that has a 35-day length, the difference in the length is not in luteal but follicular. So follicular is a longer place. So let me use an example. If a female was to have 21-day cycle, length of cycle, what would it mean? It would mean she has 7 days in follicular, but 14 in luteal. So please, luteal is always how many? 14. The person that changes is who? Follicular. I have someone that has 35 days. That means luteal is 14. How many days will be remaining? 21 days is follicular. So that means ovulation is not always on day 14. This will help females that try to calculate the ovulation date. It is not always on day 14th. It depends on your length. If your cycle length is 28, 14 is okay. But then the key thing is the ovulation happens 14 days before the next cycle length. So that's the luteal phase is constant. What is changing is this other one. So that is just that for that. If you have any questions, any specific questions about knowing the exact ovulation date, you can mention it in the comment section. I will reply your message and then explain it better for you. Okay, so we go on. Now, what happens in the uterus, which is the endometrial layer of the uterus? Generally, the uterus has 3 layers. Please, very quickly, let me just mention these 3 layers. the layer of the uterus is broadly divided into three. We have the perimetrium, which is the outermost layer, the middle layer called myometrium, and the innermost lining of the uterus called endometrium. That endometrium itself is divided into three. We have the lowest level, which is called the compact layer. We have the spongy layer, and then we have the highest layer, which is called the basal layer. Sorry. So that's the lowest, please, rather, basal, spongy, and then compact. Together, the spongy and compact are called the functional layer. So this is the layer that gets shed off. So during every menstruation, it is spongy and compact that is being shed off. During every menstruation, it is spongy and compact that is being shed off. So now, what happens is that menstruation begins. That is, in endometrial cycle, it begins with menstruation. So the first day of the cycle, due to low levels of, remember we said corpus luteum is formed in the ovary, in the luteal phase. This corpus luteum only has about 12 days to survive. So as the days go by, it regresses. So if no pregnancy, no fertilization happened, so there was no pregnancy, around day 26, corpus luteum will start shrinking, regressing. And as it regresses, the level of hormones it produces will also drop. This drop in hormone levels is what will cause menstruation or shedding of the endometrial lining in the uterus. Now, this shedding off is actually the functional layer. And let me just explain a bit about what happens. The simple thing that happens is that following my last cycle, that is for the female, following her last cycle and the regression of corpus luteum, there's drop in level of progesterone and estrogen, majorly progesterone. What happens when these guys drop? Progesterone level that drops. Initially, progesterone was the person that was responsible for the secretory phase, which was making the uterus ready for implantation. So now progesterone has dropped. What happens? That support is lost. Now, beyond that, the spiral arteries, which are the arteries that supply the functional layer, that's the spongy and compact, those spiral arteries constrict. That's a process called vasoconstriction. So they just narrow. And once a blood vessel narrows, the blood supply to a particular area decreases. So in this case, when there is narrowing of these blood vessels due to low levels of progesterone, so these blood vessels narrow, there is no more blood supply to cells of the spongy layer and the compact layer. What will happen to a cell that does not have blood supply? The cell will die. A process called necrosis. So once these cells die, they now shed off. Now beyond that, as they keep dying and starting to shed off, these cells release some enzymes that digest the connective tissue that should have held them together, allowing them to go freely. And in the female, we are also told prostaglandin is released in high levels. And these high levels of prostaglandin is released causes the uterus to contract. So that's why a female could feel pains for people that have dysmenorrhea during those periods. So what happens? Low level of progesterone following regression of corpus luteum will now cause loss of support to the endometrium generally. So no support, there's no nutrition again. Now the blood vessels, which are called spiral arteries, will vasoconstrict, no more supplying spongy and compact layer. So once they are not supplied, what will now happen? Those cells undergo necrosis, which is programmed cell death. So they die. Simple words, they die. And as they die, what now happens? They are shed off. Prostaglandin now causes uterus to contract and push them out. That flow is called menstrual flow. And usually it lasts for around 5 days. Some people have more than 5 days. Some might have less, but the range is 5 days. Now, after the 5th day, remember in the ovary, these guys have started maturing. So they have started producing what? Estrogen. Thank you for remembering. Now that estrogen is what will come to it's an hormone, so it will be carried by blood vessels to the uterus. It comes to the uterus and replaces those layers that were lost during menstruation. What were the layers? Spongy and compact. So it comes back to cause proliferation. So because of that, this phase is called proliferative phase. It comes back to make the layers grow again. So you see this diagram, you form back the layers to grow. And that is the action of estrogen on this uterus. But beyond that, another thing estrogen does, though it's not on the body of the uterus, but rather on the cervix, during this period, estrogen also goes and acts on the cervix, and the action is to make the cervix thin. That is, the cervix usually produces mucus, At the early, during menstrual phase, the early phase, this mucus is small and then very thick. Because it's thick, it does not allow sperm to come in. At that moment, I don't need fertilization now. But normally, a woman is menstruating. You don't expect her to be having sexual intercourse at that moment. But after the menstruation has ended, estrogen levels, as they keep increasing, one of the actions they do is that they cause the cervical mucus to thin out, thinning, THINNING. And as they thin out, it also makes that mucus to be watery, and it is plenty. So it is watery, it is plenty, it thins out, allowing sperm. So if she should have any form of coitus, sexual intercourse at that moment, sperm will flow in very, very freely. Why? I want it to go and fertilize the egg. I hope you're understanding. So during this proliferation phase, we don't just have the endometrium proliferating. On the cervix too, we are ensuring that the cervical mucus is watery, it is actually thin, and then it is plenty, copious. So as this happens, we keep having this happening until day 14. So on day 14, the ovary has ovulated. So now I've allowed sperm to come in. What does sperm come in to do? Fertilize. So if there was fertilization, that will happen. But beyond that, after these days has finished, ovulation has happened. Remember this corpus luteum here. What was corpus luteum producing? Progesterone. So what's the action of progesterone? Progesterone comes back to the endometrium during secretory phase. It makes it secretory. That means it will make it more glandular. There will be more new glands formed, and these glands will now be secretory, producing things like lipids, glycogen majorly, and lipids, and some proteins that it stores, so that in case there's any form of fertilization and you need to implant, you know that you are coming to a place where there's a lot of nutrition already. So that's what really happens in secretory phase. There's so much forming of blood vessels in this area, and that's usually a key thing. So the spiral arteries will form again, and then all of those things were happening under the influence of which hormone? Progesterone. That's why some people call this phase progestational phase. So as this keeps happening, as time goes on, the corpus luteum will regress. And while it is regressing here, the levels of progesterone is decreasing. So the guy now starts falling a bit. And before you know, on day 28, after I'm done with the cycle, the next day, progesterone has dropped. So because it has dropped, you go back to do what? To menstruate. So that is just it. So in summary, we've learned about the menstrual cycle today. A cyclical event that happens in females usually lasts for an average length days of 28 days, an average length of 28 days. This event is not just, it happens in the reproductive system due to changes in the levels of hormones. It happens in two major organs, ovary and uterus, where it is given different names. So in the ovary, follicles are stimulated to grow, a stage called follicular phase. As they are growing, they are producing estrogen that will go and act around from day 5 to day 14, will go to endometrium to act and cause him to proliferate, or that is multiply and replace the shaded out layers. But beyond that, as we get to day 13, there's a surge in luteinizing hormone that causes ovulation. But beyond ovulation, that same luteinizing hormone will act on these cells and change them to corpus luteum. The corpus luteum that is formed, which begins the luteal phase, this corpus luteum that is formed usually produces majorly progesterone that goes back to act here and make endometrium secretory. And once it makes endometrium secretory, you can now implant if there was fertilization. In the event of fertilization, corpus luteum will be maintained up until around the 3rd month. The end of the 3rd month, it will be the one still maintaining pregnancy by the help of human chorionic gonadotropin, a particular hormone we use to test for pregnancy, a pregnancy test strip. But beyond that, if there was no pregnancy, no fertilization, corpus luteum will regress. So that means my progesterone level will also do what? Drop. When they drop, menstruation will happen. And how does it actually happen? It's just that this drop in levels actually cause constriction of the spiral arteries. But beyond that, prostaglandin is released to press on the uterus to send out these dead tissues. Because once spiral arteries are constricted, there is a reduced blood supply to the cells. And once blood supplies are reduced, you have to expel. So that's why the woman menstruates. So thank you very much for joining us today. I believe and I know you understood. So if you're having an issue, you could watch the video again. It will clear your doubt. You need to understand better. You have a question, please mention it in the comment section. Do very well to like this video. Do very well to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share the video to as many people as possible that you know this can help. People that are medical students, people that need to know these things. Thank you very much for joining us. Till next time.